The first murders in detail, Lake Herman Road, December 20th, 1968. It was the last. Friday before Christmas. Vallejo, California was dressed in holiday lights. The streets alive with shoppers and families preparing for the festive season. But out on the edge of town, past the small neighborhoods and into the cold countryside, the world was quieter. That night, David Faraday, 17, had convinced his parents to let him take their family station wagon out. He wasn't known as a rule breaker. He was polite, clean-cut, a boy who played the French horn in the school band. His family expected him to return by 11. He had only one destination in mind, a date with Betty Lou Jensen. Betty Lou was just 16. She had blonde hair, bright eyes, and the kind of small-town beauty that drew attention wherever she went. She was shy, but friends described her as sweet and trustworthy, the kind of girl parents didn't worry about. That night was special. It was her first date with David. They drove out to Lake Herman Road, a narrow rural lane that teenagers often used as a lover's lane. The road cut through fields and patches of trees, a place where the only sound at night was the rustle of wind and the occasional hum of passing cars. David parked the car in a turnout spot, not far from the gate of a nearby pumping station. The night was bitter cold, and frost already gathered on the ground. They talked softly, maybe about school, maybe about the holidays ahead. The world was still innocent for them. Then headlights appeared. At first, the car slowed as though checking on them, then pulled up just feet away. The driver switched off the engine. A man stepped out. David and Betty Lou had no reason to be afraid, not yet. But within seconds, everything changed. The man raised a handgun and fired into the car. Windows shattered. David tried to protect Betty Lou, but the attacker pressed the barrel close and fired into David's head. He slumped instantly, bleeding against the car seat. Betty Lou bolted from the car in terror. She didn't scream, at least. No one heard her. She sprinted into the cold darkness, her breath rising like smoke in the air, but she didn't get far. Bullets struck her in the back, one after another, tearing through her small frame. She collapsed face down, just feet from the road, her body frozen in the December air. The killer walked calmly back to his car, reloaded, and vanished into the night. Discovery minutes later, a motorist driving down Lake Herman Road spotted something strange, a body on the roadside. At first, he thought it was a mannequin. But when he stopped, the truth froze him. He raced to the nearest phone booth and called police. Deputies from the Solano County Sheriff's Department arrived. They found David still alive but unconscious. He died before reaching the hospital. Betty Lou was already gone, 5 bullet wounds in her back. No witnesses, no clear suspect. Just 2 innocent kids dead in the cold, killed without reason. The police scoured the scene, collecting shell casings, photographing the bodies, marking tire tracks. But there was nothing concrete, no fingerprints, no eyewitnesses, no known enemies. It was, at first, a mystery without a name. A town in fear, the murder shocked Vallejo. Small towns are built on the illusion of safety, and the deaths shattered that illusion overnight. Parents forbade their kids from going out at night. Newspapers printed every rumor. Everyone asked the same question: why? There was no robbery, no sexual assault, no motive, just death. At first, investigators thought it might have been a random act of violence, or perhaps a personal grudge. But no evidence pointed in any direction. The case began to stall. Months passed. People moved on, at least they tried to. Until it happened again. The Blue Rock Springs attack, July 4th, 1969. It was Independence Day. Fireworks exploded across Vallejo. Families gathered in parks, and teenagers flocked to parties. Among them was Darlene Ferrin, 22 years old, married, lively, and popular. She worked as a waitress, full of energy, the kind of girl who seemed to know everyone. That night, she invited a younger friend, Michael Mago, just 19, to join her for a late-night drive. Around midnight, they pulled into Blue Rock Springs Park, a quiet spot just 4 miles from the site of the Lake Herman murders. Darlene parked her brown Corvair in the lot. They talked for a while, probably watching the afterglow of fireworks fade from the sky. Then a car pulled up beside them. The headlights blazed. The vehicle sat there for a few seconds before driving away. Michael sighed in relief. But only moments later, the same car returned. This time, it parked directly behind them. A man stepped out, holding a flashlight and a pistol. At first, Michael thought it might be a police officer. The bright light blinded them. Then the gunfire began. The stranger fired through the window, hitting both Darlene and Michael. Bullets tore into their arms, chests, and faces. Michael screamed, collapsing onto the seat. Darlene gasped, her body riddled with wounds. The attacker turned to walk away, then doubled back and fired again into their writhing bodies. Then, just like before, he left. But this time, something chilling followed. The phone call, less than an hour after the shooting, a call came in to the Vallejo Police Department. The voice was calm, male, confident. "I want to report a double murder. If you will go 1 mile east on Columbus Parkway, you will find kids in a brown car. They were shot with a 9mm Luger. I also killed those kids last year. Goodbye." The dispatcher froze. The caller knew too much. When officers arrived at Blue Rock Springs, they found the car exactly where he said. Darlene Ferrin died before reaching the hospital. But against all odds, Michael Mago survived, though barely. He described the shooter as a heavy-set man, possibly in his late 20s to early 30s, with light brown hair and a round face. The police realized they weren't dealing with a random killer. This was someone who wanted credit, someone who wanted them to know he would kill again. Patterns emerging by now, investigators connected the two shootings. The weapon matched, the method matched, and the eerie phone call suggested intelligence and planning. This wasn't a criminal who killed and ran. This was a man who killed and then reached out, demanding recognition. Still, they had no name, no motive, no clear suspect. But the killer already had a name in mind for himself, one that would terrify California for years to come. And so the stage was set. The Lake Herman murders were no longer just an unsolved double homicide. Blue Rock Springs confirmed it. A serial killer was loose in California. And soon, the world would meet him in his own words, the Zodiac. A shadow over California. The air in California in the late 1960s carried a strange tension. On one hand, it was the age of freedom. The summer of love had blossomed in San Francisco. Music festivals echoed with guitars and chants of peace, and young men and women filled the streets with flowers in their hair. But beneath the sunshine and songs of protest, there was something darker, something that would soon turn the Golden State into a hunting ground. America was already on edge. The Vietnam War had divided the nation, leaving grief-stricken parents and angry young people clashing in streets. Civil rights battles filled the news. Crime rates were rising. The country felt as though it was at a crossroads, torn between hope and chaos. And then on a lonely road in Northern California, the darkness revealed itself. December 20th, 1968, Lake Herman Road. The night was crisp and cold. High school students Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday had planned nothing more than a simple date. They drove out to the quiet stretch of Lake Herman Road near Vallejo, a popular spot for young couples. The stars glittered above, the kind of winter night where you could almost see your breath glow in the headlights. They parked, they talked. Maybe they laughed nervously about school, about friends, about the holidays that were only days away. It was the kind of night teenagers are supposed to remember forever innocent, fleeting, ordinary. But headlights approached. At first, it might have seemed like another couple, or maybe a local farmer passing by, but this car didn't keep driving. It pulled up close. A man stepped out. His presence wasn't rushed, but deliberate. He carried a gun. Before the two teenagers could fully react, shots tore through the silence. Bullets pierced the car. David tried to shield Betty Lou, but he was shot in the head at point-blank range. Betty Lou ran, desperate for her life. She didn't make it far. Bullets struck her in the back, and she collapsed on the cold ground, her red dress stained darker under the moonlight. By the time police arrived, there were no witnesses. No clear motive. Just two kids whose only crime was being young and alive on the wrong night. The newspapers would cover it as a tragedy, but no one yet realized they were the opening move of a killer who wanted the world's attention. A killer who wanted fame most murderers hide. They run, they fear discovery. But the man who would call himself Zodiac was different. In July 1969, letters began arriving at the offices of the San Francisco Chronicle, San Francisco Examiner, and Vallejo Times-Herald. The envelopes were carefully printed, marked with stamps, and inside each one terror. The writer claimed responsibility for the murders on Lake Herman Road and for another attack that had happened just days before on July 4th, 1969. The letters weren't just confessions, they were threats. The writer demanded that the newspapers print his letters on the front page, or he would kill again. To prove he was no hoax, he included details only the killer could have known. At the bottom of each letter was a strange symbol, a circle with a cross through it, a mark that would become infamous. The sign of Zodiac. The cipher that taunted the world. One of the first letters contained a code puzzle made of symbols and strange shapes. The killer promised that if the cipher were solved, it would reveal his true identity. Families clipped it out of the newspapers and tried to crack it at their kitchen tables. Teachers gave it to students in class. Cryptographers pored over it, desperate to uncover the mind behind the madness. Within a week, a schoolteacher and his wife decoded the first cipher. It didn't give his name. It gave something worse. I like killing people because it is so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest because man is the most dangerous animal of all. This wasn't a killer seeking money or revenge. This was a hunter, someone who saw human lives as trophies, and he wanted the whole world to know. Fear takes hold by late 1969. The Zodiac had become more than a murderer. He was a specter in the headlines. Parents warned their children not to go out at night. Couples avoided lonely roads. Every mysterious car on the highway felt like a possible stalker. The police received letters that mocked them, taunted them, and threatened more violence. One letter warned that he would shoot children as they got off school buses. Another included a blood-stained piece of a victim's shirt, proof that he wasn't bluffing. The Zodiac wasn't just killing, he was orchestrating fear. An unsolved puzzle begins. The Zodiac claimed many murders, but police could only confirm a handful. His letters suggested a man obsessed with power, with control, with the thrill of playing cat and mouse with an entire state. By the early 1970s, he had become one of the most infamous names in America. And then just as suddenly as he appeared, he went silent. No more letters. No more killings connected with certainty. The trail went cold. But the question remained, whispered for decades in detective offices, crime documentaries, and late-night conversations. What happened to the Zodiac Killer? The letters and ciphers, the killer had drawn blood twice. He had stalked lovers' lanes, fired into cars, and left the police scrambling. But killing wasn't enough for him. Unlike most predators, he didn't crave silence, he craved recognition. And so, in the summer 1969, he introduced himself to the world. Not in person, but in ink. The envelopes. On July 31st, 1969, 3 nearly identical envelopes arrived at 3 different newspapers: the San Francisco Chronicle, the San Francisco Examiner, the Vallejo Times-Herald. The letters were carefully printed, not handwritten. Each one began the same way: This is the murderer of the two teenagers last. Christmas at Lake Herman and the girl on the 4th of July near the golf course. The killer gave details only he could know: calibers, clothing, the number of shots fired. It was proof. The writer wasn't bluffing, but the true horror wasn't in the confession. It was in what came next. Enclosed with each letter was a cipher, a block of strange symbols, circles, triangles, and backwards letters. The killer claimed the code revealed his identity. If you do not print this cipher by the afternoon of Fry, 1st of August 69, I will go on a kill rampage Friday night. I will cruise around all weekend killing lone people in the night, then move on to kill again, until I end up with 12 people over the weekend. It wasn't just a threat, it was a demand. A bargain struck with terror. The newspapers react. The editors faced a terrible decision. Printing the killer's letter meant giving him the attention he demanded. Refusing might mean blood on their hands if he followed through on his threats. After hurried conferences with police, the newspapers complied. On August 1st, 1969, the 3 major papers printed the cipher across their pages. Families gathered around breakfast tables, staring at the bizarre symbols. Amateur codebreakers clipped them out. Children tried them as puzzles. For a moment, all of California became cryptographers, trying to peer into the mind of a murderer. The first solution for days, the cipher baffled readers. The FBI even got involved, their cryptanalysis division poring over the strange patterns. But the solution came not from professionals, but from an ordinary couple. Donald and Betty Harden, a school teacher, and his wife and Salinas, sat at their kitchen table and studied the symbols. Within a week, they cracked it. The solution was chilling. I like killing people because it is so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest because man is the most dangerous animal of all. There was no name, no identity. The killer had promised his cipher would reveal who he was. Instead, it revealed something worse: his philosophy. He wasn't driven by revenge or money or even hatred. He killed because he enjoyed it, because it gave him power, because it made him feel alive. The message ended with a taunt: "When I die, I will be reborn in paradise, and all that I have killed will become my slaves." Police realized the cipher wasn't a riddle to unmask him. It was a manifesto, a window into a warped mind that saw murder as a game. Naming himself on August 7th, 1969, another letter arrived at the San Francisco Examiner. It began with words that froze detectives. "Dear editor, this is the Zodiac speaking." It was the first time he used the name. It would stick forever. From that moment on, he wasn't just a murderer. He was the Zodiac, a self-created legend who had branded himself with a name and a symbol. He wasn't hiding from the world, he wanted to be remembered. The taunts continue over the next months. More letters arrived. Some included details of the crimes. Others contained new ciphers. In one, he mocked the police for not catching him. In another, he threatened to attack school buses, promising to pick off the kiddies as they come bouncing out. Parents panicked, and police cars shadowed buses for weeks. He even sent a piece of bloody shirt torn from the clothing of Paul Stein, a taxi driver he murdered in San Francisco in October 1969. It was undeniable proof. The Zodiac was laughing at them all. The power of fear. The press had created killers before. Jack the Ripper, Bonnie and Clyde. But the Zodiac was different. He wasn't famous because the newspapers pursued him. He was famous because he pursued them. Every letter was a performance. Every cipher a stage trick. Every murder a headline. He didn't need to kill every day to terrify California. His words did the work. When his letters appeared, the public shuddered. People stayed home at night. Couples stopped driving to secluded spots. The Zodiac had weaponized fear itself. The unsolved codes, not all of his ciphers were cracked. The most infamous, known as the 340 cipher, remained unsolved for more than 50 years. In December 2020, a team of codebreakers finally deciphered it. The message mocked law enforcement again, bragging that they would never catch me. It gave no name, no identity, just more cruelty from the grave. To this day, some of his shorter codes remain mysteries. They may contain nothing, or they may hold the key to his true name. The Cat and Mouse Game by late 1969, the Zodiac wasn't just a killer, he was a myth. A boogeyman that stalked newspapers and nightmares alike. Detectives worked around the clock, chasing dead ends. The public devoured every update. Children whispered his name in playgrounds. Lovers looked over their shoulders on quiet roads. He had turned California into his chessboard. And with every letter, every cipher, every mocking phone call, he made one thing clear. The game had only just begun. The victims' stories, every crime story has two sides, the predator and the prey. The Zodiac wanted his victims to be anonymous trophies, names scrawled in letters, numbers in his twisted scorecard, but they were not just statistics. They were real people, with families, laughter, and dreams that ended too soon. Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday. The first night, David Faraday was a boy who believed in doing things right. He was 17, earnest, a little shy, but ambitious. He played the French horn in the school band and planned to join the Air Force after graduation. On the night of December 20th, 1968, he wanted everything to go perfectly. It was his first real date with 16-year-old Betty Lou Jensen. She was quiet, artistic, and known for her radiant smile. She loved drawing and planned to be an artist someday. Betty Lou's friends teased her that she was the serious one, the kind of girl who'd rather sketch flowers in her notebook than gossip about boys. That night, she dressed carefully, her red dress pressed and neat. It was a special occasion. Their evening began with Christmas caroling with friends. Later, they borrowed the Faraday family station wagon and headed toward Lake Herman Road, a quiet stretch of country lane that teenagers often used as a place to park and talk. What they didn't know was that a hunter was already prowling the dark roads. David parked the car near the pumping station. They sat close, voices hushed, watching the cold stars. Maybe he worked up the courage to hold her hand. Maybe she laughed nervously, cheeks pink in the December chill. Then headlights. The car pulled up beside them, its engine cutting out. A man stepped forward. Before words could be exchanged, gunfire erupted. Windows shattered. David slumped in his seat, struck in the head. Betty Lou bolted from the car, running in blind terror into the field. She made it 30 feet before bullets ripped into her back. When deputies arrived minutes later, David still breathed faintly, but his life slipped away before doctors could save him. Betty Lou lay face down in the dirt, her red dress soaked in blood, the stars still glittering above her. For Vallejo, Christmas would never be the same again. Darlene Ferrin and Michael Mageau, Blue Rock Springs. 7 months later, the killer struck again. Darlene Ferrin was 22, a waitress at Terry's Waffle Shop. She was popular, outgoing, the kind of woman everyone seemed to know. Her friends called her D. She was married, but that didn't stop her from enjoying the company of friends. On July 4th, 1969, she invited Michael Mageau, a shy 19-year-old, to go for a late-night drive after the fireworks. They parked at Blue Rock Springs Park, another quiet spot favored by young couples. The night was warm, the air heavy with the smell of gunpowder from the earlier fireworks. As they sat in her car, a vehicle pulled up beside them. Its headlights burned bright, blinding them, then drove off. Michael relaxed, probably just another couple, he thought. But moments later, the same car returned, parking directly behind them. A man stepped out with a flashlight and a pistol. He shone the beam into their faces, giving the illusion of a police officer. Michael squinted, trying to see past the glare. Then the shots began. Bullets tore into both of them. Michael screamed as rounds ripped through his arms and jaw. Darlene gasped, hit multiple times, her body jerking under the force. The gunman turned to leave then, chillingly, came back. He fired again into their bleeding bodies before calmly walking away. Darlene died at the hospital. Michael survived, his body permanently scarred, his mind haunted forever. He gave police the first real description of the Zodiac, a heavy-set man, about 5'8" or 5'9", with light brown hair and a round face. But there was something more terrifying than the attack itself. Less than an hour later, the Vallejo police received a phone call. The man's voice was calm, almost casual. "I want to report a double murder. If you will go 1 mile east on Columbus Parkway, you will find kids in a brown car. They were shot with a 9mm Luger. I also killed those kids last year. Goodbye." Click. The line went dead. The Zodiac had stepped out of the shadows and into history. Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard, Lake Berryessa. On September 27, 1969, the Zodiac changed his methods. This time, it wasn't a drive-by shooting. It was something theatrical, ritualistic. Brian Hartnell, a 20-year-old law student, and Cecilia Shepard, a bright 22-year-old student, were picnicking at Lake Berryessa, north of Napa. It was a warm afternoon, the kind of day where sunlight danced on the water. They sat on a blanket under a tree, talking, sketching, enjoying the quiet. Suddenly, Cecilia noticed a figure approaching. At first, she thought it was a hiker, but as the figure drew closer, their blood ran cold. The man wore a black hood with a white cross-circle symbol stitched on the chest. His face was hidden behind sunglasses attached to the hood. In his hand, a gun. At his waist, a knife. The Zodiac had arrived in costume. He told them he was an escaped convict from Montana, that he needed money and a car. His voice was calm, rehearsed, as if reading from a script. He ordered Cecilia to tie Brian's hands with clothesline, then tied hers. But the knots were false security. With cold precision, the Zodiac pulled out a knife and began stabbing them, again and again. 6 wounds into Brian, 10 into Cecilia. When he was finished, he walked back to Brian's Volkswagen and, with a black marker, wrote on the door, "Vallejo, December 20th, 68, the 4th of July, 69, Sept 27 to 69, 6:30, by knife," a signature of blood. Cecilia, despite her wounds, clung to life long enough to give police a description of the costume. Brian survived, though scarred and traumatized. Cecilia died 2 days later in the hospital. For the first time, the Zodiac had spoken face-to-face with his victims. For the first time, the world saw how much he craved performance. He wasn't just a killer, he was an actor staging his own horror play. Paul Stine, the taxi driver, just 2 weeks later, on October 11th, 1969, the Zodiac struck again, this time in the heart of San Francisco. Paul Stine was a 29-year-old taxi driver. He was a part-time student, quiet, working nights to make ends meet. That evening, he picked up a passenger at the intersection of Mason and Geary, the destination, Washington and Maple, in the upscale Presidio Heights neighborhood. When the cab stopped, the passenger pulled out a pistol and shot Paul in the head. Then, in a bizarre twist, he calmly leaned over, cut off a piece of Stine's bloody shirt, and walked away into the night. Children watching from a window across the street saw him. Police officers responding to the call even saw a man walking casually away, but a dispatch mistake described the suspect as a black male adult. The man they passed was white. The Zodiac slipped right through their fingers. Days later, the San Francisco Chronicle received a letter. Inside was a scrap of Paul Stine's bloodied shirt, proof. The Zodiac bragged that he could kill again anytime. He claimed he could shoot children as they stepped off school buses. The city held its breath. Parents escorted their kids, buses were shadowed by patrol cars, and fear reached its peak. More than names, The suspects, the Zodiac's murders were terrifying, but what truly unnerved California was his vanishing trick. He struck, wrote letters, mocked the police, then disappeared back into the ordinary world. Somewhere out there, the man who wore the black hood at Lake Berryessa was buying groceries, paying bills, nodding politely to neighbors. The question that haunted detectives was simple. Who was he? Over the decades, dozens of men were investigated. Some were quickly ruled out, others lingered as possibilities. A few became infamous in their own right. Arthur Lee Allen, the prime suspect, no name looms larger in the Zodiac investigation than Arthur Lee Allen. Allen was a former schoolteacher, a heavyset man with a troubled past. He was intelligent, but socially awkward, with a reputation for inappropriate behavior around children. He was also a convicted sex offender. When police searched his background, unsettling coincidences emerged. Location: Allen lived in Vallejo, close to both the Lake Herman and Blue Rock Springs crime scenes. Obsession with killing: a friend once reported that Allen talked about wanting to hunt people with a gun, bragging that man is the most dangerous animal. Symbolism: he wore a Zodiac brand wristwatch, complete with a cross-circle symbol. Timing: he was interviewed by police in 1971, but always denied involvement. Investigators searched his home. They found weapons, bomb-making materials, and disturbing writings, but what they didn't find was proof. Handwriting experts compared his writing to the Zodiac's letters, no match. Fingerprints didn't line up. DNA testing years later showed no connection. Still, many detectives believed Allen was the man. Some went to their graves convinced of it. But officially, Arthur Lee Allen was never charged. When he died in 1992, he took his secrets with him. Lawrence Kane, the smooth talker, another strong candidate was Lawrence Kane, a salesman with a criminal past. Kane had been arrested for voyeurism and sexual misconduct. He lived in the same area as Zodiac's victims and had medical issues that some believed matched the killer as profile temporal lobe epilepsy, which can cause erratic behavior. Most chilling, one of the Zodiac survivors, Kathleen Johns, who was abducted in 1970, later identified Kane as her kidnapper from a photo lineup. He also worked in Lake Tahoe, where a woman named Donna Lass vanished in 1970, a disappearance the Zodiac hinted he was responsible for. Kane's handwriting bore similarities to the Zodiac's, though experts disagreed. Like Allen, he remained a suspect but was never proven guilty. Richard Gajkowski, the journalist. In the 2000s, a new suspect emerged thanks to online sleuths. Richard Gajkowski, a journalist and filmmaker. Gajkowski worked at a radical underground newspaper in San Francisco during the Zodiac's reign. Some amateur detectives believed his writings mirrored Zodiac's style. Others pointed out his physical resemblance to police sketches. One woman, who claimed to be friends with Gajkowski, insisted he had confessed privately to being the Zodiac, but hard evidence never surfaced. Gajkowski died in 2004, his alleged secret unconfirmed. The countless others over the years, the suspect list grew. Rick Marshall, a film projectionist obsessed with codes. Earl Van Vest Jr., accused in a book by his own son of being the Zodiac. Jack Torrance, whose stepson claimed to find confessions and photos among his belongings. And dozens more, each with circumstantial connections, each fitting pieces of the puzzle but never completing the picture. Every lead seemed to offer promise. Every lead collapsed under scrutiny. The DNA era. By the 2000s, technology offered new hope. DNA could be tested from the Zodiac's letters, particularly the saliva on the stamps and envelopes. When samples were compared, Arthur Lee Allen was cleared. Others were too. In 2020, a group of independent investigators known as the Case Breakers claimed they had identified the Zodiac as Gary Francis Post, a house painter and Air Force veteran who died in 2018. They pointed to scars on his forehead resembling the sketch, military experience matching Zodiac's knowledge of weapons, and testimony from people who claimed he confessed. But police have never confirmed their findings. The evidence remains circumstantial. Post, like Alan, remains locked in limbo, a maybe, a possibility, a ghost in the files. The uncatchable phantom, the problem with the Zodiac case wasn't a lack of suspects, it was too many. The killer's randomness meant anyone could fit. He didn't target one type of victim. He didn't leave a consistent trail. He thrived in ambiguity. In the end, the suspects became a hall of mirrors. Each one reflected pieces of the Zodiac, but none gave the full picture. Some detectives swear Alan was the man. Others believe Kane, Kaikowski, or Post. Internet sleuths dig through old records, comparing handwriting, voices, and photographs. But as of today, the official word stands. The Zodiac Killer has never been identified. The psychological shadow, what makes the case more haunting, is the possibility that the Zodiac wasn't one man at all. Some theorists suggest the letters could have been written by multiple people, or that the real killer stopped writing while copycats continued. Others argue the Zodiac may have been a composite myth, different killers hiding behind one name. But whoever he was, the suspects left behind one undeniable truth. The Zodiac Killer was not a phantom. He was flesh and blood. He lived, worked, walked the same streets as his victims. He may have even been interviewed by police, smiling politely, knowing he had fooled them all. And then he vanished. By the mid-1970s, the trail had gone cold. The letters slowed, then stopped. The suspects faded back into ordinary life or into their graves. The Zodiac remained a name without a face. The vanishing by the early 1970s, the Zodiac Killer had terrified California for nearly half a decade. He had killed, ghosted, written ciphers, and threatened entire cities. Newspapers printed his words. Police chased endless leads. Parents clutched their children tighter. And then, as suddenly as he had appeared, he began to fade away. The last letters? In 1974, the Zodiac's letters trickled into newsrooms again, but their tone was different. One was a sarcastic critique of the movie The Exorcist, calling it the best satirical comedy that I've ever seen. Another threatened to kill people if newspapers didn't print his words, but the menace felt weaker, almost performative, as if the once-feared monster was losing his teeth. The final widely accepted Zodiac letter arrived in July 1974. It simply said, "Me, 37, SFPD to 0. It was a scoreboard, a taunt claiming dozens of victims beyond the confirmed 5. But investigators doubted it. The handwriting seemed off. The tone lacked the cruel creativity of earlier letters. Some believed the real Zodiac had stopped writing and that imposters were sending fake letters. Others believed the killer himself was playing games, deliberately changing his style. Either way, by 1975, the stream of communication dried up. The man who once craved headlines, who begged for attention, went silent. The cold trail silence can be more frightening than noise. For detectives, the letters had been a lifeline. Each message provided new handwriting, new phrases, sometimes even clues. But when the Zodiac stopped writing, he also stopped making mistakes. Without fresh evidence, the case grew cold. Leads slowed, witnesses faded, officers retired. The 1970s slid into the 1980s, and the Zodiac became more myth than man, an unsolved riddle whispered about in books, documentaries, and late-night conversations. Why did he stop? The question haunted investigators. What happened to the Zodiac Killer? Several theories emerged. Death. Perhaps he died suddenly, car crash, illness, or an accident. If so, the silence was final, and the case ended not by police work, but by fate. Prison. Some believe the Zodiac was arrested under another name for unrelated crimes. Hidden behind bars, he no longer had the freedom to kill or write letters. Boredom. The Zodiac may have simply tired of the game. He craved attention, and once the world moved on, perhaps he no longer felt powerful. Another life. The most chilling theory is that he just stopped. That the man who wrote those letters folded back into society, bought groceries, raised children, paid taxes, and lived as someone's neighbor, never revealing the monster he once was. Each theory is possible. None have been proven. Echoes in the darkness. Even though the Zodiac's letters stopped, his presence lingered. Whenever a mysterious murder occurred in California, whispers rose. Could this be him? When a coded letter arrived anywhere, people wondered if it was the Zodiac's hand. Copycats emerged. Hoaxers mailed fake ciphers. In 1978, a letter claiming to be from the Zodiac surfaced, but experts quickly declared it a forgery. The real killer, if alive, watched as his myth grew without him. The legend grows. The silence didn't kill the Zodiac story, it made it stronger. In the 1980s and 1990s, authors and journalists began publishing books about the case. Each one claimed to have found new evidence, a new suspect, a new solution. Some pointed to Arthur Lee Allen, others to fringe names. Hollywood took notice. Movies like Dirty Harry, 1971, were inspired by the Zodiac, with Clint Eastwood facing off against a sniper clearly based on him. Decades later, David Fincher's Zodiac, 2007, reignited interest. Haunting a new generation with the story's lack of resolution, the Zodiac had become larger than life, a cultural ghost. Time, the greatest enemy, but for investigators, time was not a friend. Witnesses aged, evidence degraded, memories grew fuzzy. Handwriting comparisons, once cutting edge, seemed primitive in the age of DNA. And while DNA offered hope, the preserved samples from Zodiac letters were often contaminated, incomplete, or inconclusive. The case became a race against time, not just to solve it, but to preserve what was left before it vanished entirely into history. A quiet fade by the late 20th century, the Zodiac was no longer an active terror, but a story. His reign had ended not with handcuffs, but with silence. No trial, no confession, no justice. Just unanswered questions, aging files, and a name that continued to send chills decades after his last confirmed kill. Somewhere, perhaps, the Zodiac lived out his final years in obscurity, an old man whose neighbors would never guess the monster he once was. Or maybe he had died long ago, leading detectives chasing a ghost. The silence, in its own way, was the cruelest act of all. By the dawn of the 21st century, the Zodiac Killer was no longer an active case, but a cold case, frozen in time. But technology, persistence, and the obsession of amateur sleuths promised that the story wasn't finished.